Amateur Traveler, episode 847. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about temples and berets, lake villages and Lak Lak, Kampot and Khmer Rouge as we go to Cambodia. This is Chris Christensen from Amateur Traveler. Let's talk about Cambodia. I'd like to welcome to the show Matt Gibson from expatmatt.com, who's come to talk to us about Cambodia. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
I want to say welcome back because I've known you for so long, but I don't think you've been on the show before.
I never have. I think we've chatted about it a few times. You seem to always look for locations that are totally not appropriate for me. This is the first time I can remember responding and being like, I'm perfect for this one.
And we're talking about Cambodia. What's your connection with Cambodia here?
I've been to Cambodia several times. I've been living in Asia for nearly 2 decades. And I've been to Cambodia several times. But most recently, I lived there for about 18 months up to and during part of the pandemic. So I spent quite a lot of time there.
And you were in Siem Reap?
I was in Siem Reap.
Siem Reap. Okay. I was going to say, we're going to be checking my pronunciations of all these places here.
Yeah, we can check mine too. I'm not sure that I get them all exactly right.
Excellent. Why should somebody go to Cambodia?
There's clearly the most obvious reason is to go to Angkor Wat and the surrounding temple areas, because that's one of the greatest wonders of the ancient world. It's one of the most amazing ancient temple projects that I've ever seen. And after living there, I learned that exploring it gets better the farther out you go into the places that nobody goes. It's not the same type of temples over and over. I felt like in Central and South America, it was like the same thing over and over. There's a lot of variety. It's really amazing and mystical. And that, and of course, the people are really amazing. They have this new generation coming up that's post-Khmer Rouge, that's sort of the sons and daughters who came after that generation that have this bright future ahead, and people are just really happy and positive these days. It's a really wonderful feeling.
Excellent. What kind of itinerary are you going to recommend for us?
I think any itinerary is going to include, of course, going to the Angkor Wat complex. You're going to also want to see Phnom Penh. I think the real flexible part of the itinerary is how far and how much time you want to spend in the south of the country. So because of the way Cambodia is laid out, it's a lot of road travel. You can fly between Phnom Penh and Siem Reap. It's about a 10-hour, 12-hour drive. But you want to travel the country in one direction. You're not going to do a loop because you're just going to spend an extra day driving in order to complete your loop.
Okay.
So you would probably land in Phnom Penh and do a zip down south if you want to go towards the coast. In my opinion, this is the less interesting part of the country compared to going north to Angkor Wat and that area. But there is some real natural beauty if you go south. So I think most people, I'm not going to say don't go to Sihanoukville, which is the southernmost coastal tourist city that has been heavily developed by the Chinese in recent years and turned into a bit of a gambling destination. Okay. I wouldn't say don't go there, but I would say a lot of people don't enjoy it like they used to. If you read old guides to Cambodia, they'll say go to Sihanoukville, see the beach, it's really beautiful, and it is. But the experience of a large number of Chinese gamblers having taken over most of the area has changed that vibe for a lot of people. So I wouldn't say don't go, but I'd say know what you're going to see if you're going to take that few extra hours of driving and spend that extra day or two to go to Sihanoukville. Make sure you understand what you're getting first. Other than that, though, there is also some other beautiful areas just north of there that are also in the south, where there's some rivers and lakes and waterfalls and things like that that people really, and many people will recommend. Kampot is one very popular place to go that's in between Phnom Penh and Sihanoukville. That's a really beautiful natural area with a lot of boutique-y hotels and is very nice. Now, those are the main sites in the south that people go to. There are a couple of islands off of the southern coast that people like, but less are visited. So if you move from there north, then you have Phnom Penh. Phnom Penh, in my opinion, I think it's an all right city. It's worth a day or 2 or 3 if you like good food. There's a lot of good food there, international cuisine. There is a museum about the Khmer Rouge genocide, which, in my opinion, is very worth visiting. I stop in there, try to every time I'm in Phnom Penh. It has a really good audio guide. Takes place in a former elementary school that had been converted to a prison during the Khmer Rouge. And you have some old dudes who are selling books there, who have written books about growing up during the Khmer Rouge. There was one who I met there that was selling a book of his family. 4 of the 5 boys went missing, and he went looking for them after everything was over. It's a very moving place. It's not a happy tourist place, but it's...
No. I took a group of amateur traveler listeners there, but we did that and then also did the Killing Fields.
Okay, yeah.
So this is and I say, Seoul Slang Genocide Museum?
I believe that's the name. Yep. There's only one in town.
Got it. Okay.
And you remember walking around it. It's the square area you walk through the different rooms. Yep. You see the different restraint implementations and things like that they use.
And a lot of artwork done by former prisoners.
Yep. Cambodia doesn't have a happy history. And if you want to learn the history, you're going to learn about the Khmer Rouge, and I think it's a really worthwhile place. It's also, the money is going to the right places. There's these fellows also selling books, are usually supporting a nonprofit organization. So it's all a very all-around good thing to do and very worthwhile.
The thing that was surprising for me when we took the group of listeners there wasn't the Killing Fields, which is just outside of town, is a monument, a memorial, if you will, to the victims. And it's one of the places where the mass killings happened. And we saw that. And then we went to the museum you're talking about. And I knew that would be awful. Something that I felt I needed to see, that we needed to understand. But what I didn't realize is how often it would come up with other people we met along the rest of our route, because everybody in the country was affected by this. And so we'd be going to the palace, and our tour guide was saying he didn't wear glasses for those whole years, because if you wore glasses, you'd be labeled intellectual and killed. And our tour guide, that was the tour guide at the palace, our tour guide who was with us the whole 10 days or so had been orphaned during that time period. And all of those things, everybody had a story.
Yes. When we were living there in Siem Reap, our favorite security guard, he was this older fellow, had a giant gash on his neck, scar from something that was, we found out later, related to the Khmer Rouge. And just the nicest, most reliable, happy fellow that you would ever meet. But you could clearly see on his face the history that he lived through. And it was always like this reminder of how it wasn't that long ago. And one thing you'll notice too when you visit is that, so the first time I visited was around 2008. And I found the country to have a very sad atmosphere. It felt very down, just felt downtrodden. People weren't smiling. It wasn't a super friendly trip. It seemed like a struggle to get by. And I think there was a lot of just this cloud of what had happened still hanging over people. And now, having visited and lived there about 10 years later, what you'll notice is everybody is a young family. It's all young families where everyone's about 25 and younger. They're all getting jobs for the first time. They're all having kids for the first time. And they didn't live through that. And Cambodia's been developing over those 10 years. Life is getting better. So the atmosphere shifted dramatically from being a place that was a little depressing and a little sad to a place that now is like overwhelmingly just positive and very just optimistic about the future and young. You'll just notice everyone's young because that there's a generation gap that was created. But it's so nice and pleasant to see that change, and to just be there is a really pleasant thing now. I really enjoyed it.
Cool. We're talking about Phnom Penh. I was struck what a pretty French colonial city it was.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially the old part of town by the Royal Palace and that area.
It is. The French colonial thing attracts a lot of foodies who open up nice little boutique-y restaurants.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's got that French influence, right? And so there's a lot of French people opening up French-style restaurants or fusion restaurants. And there's this really nice local scene of craft brewing, of brewing liquors as well, boutique liquors, and also just cool, really clearly people who really care about their food opening small restaurants. So it's a really nice... It's not a fancy gastronomic scene, but it's a really cool one with great food, and it's not that expensive.
Now, when you say not that expensive, when I was in Cambodia, dinner was $4. I think that was if you got the mango smoothie. So $4 or $5.
If you're going to go out for a Cambodian dinner, if you're not getting a smoothie or a beer, then you're going to pay $2, $2.50, something like that for a normal beef lak lak or something like that. If you're going to go a little bit upper, like nicer. So there was one place in Siem Reap that sort of embodies this dining scene to me. It was called George's Rummery. Unfortunately, it closed during COVID. Okay. But they had a custom rum brewing on the premises. It was owned by a French guy, and it was all... so what's the word for French diaspora food that is associated with New Orleans?
Creole?
Yes, Creole. It's all Creole food.
Okay.
But Creole in the true diaspora, like some from Africa. And it was such a nice experience to go. They'd bring you out all of their little mini shots of all of their different types of rum. You would have a gumbo or like some crazy food that you never tried that was delicious. And you'd pay like $12. But you're getting this wonderful experience for what you go to In-N-Out and you spend $12. And this is this wonderful dining experience. So you can find places like that there that are just really people who really care about their food and have a wonderful experience with some unique cuisines and then pay like $15 for the night.
Going back to Phnom Penh, we headed up there to Siem Reap there momentarily, but are there other things that you would recommend we do in Phnom Penh?
There's the Royal Palace, and this is one thing. Phnom Penh isn't a big tourism city. It's more of it's just a capital city, mostly. Right. There's the Royal Palace. There are some really beautiful parks, and there's the riverside where you can get a hotel by the riverside, and that's pretty nice. But beyond that, my experience in Phnom Penh has mostly been, there's a really nice little bar district if you want to go out drinking, which is very close to where all of these cool restaurants are normally situated.
Okay.
But it's mostly things like that I found. There's the museum, there's a lot of nice restaurants and bars, and there's a cool expat scene to integrate with. But beyond that, I didn't find a ton of things to do in Phnom Penh that were very touristy.
Okay. So there's the bicycle rickshaw, the ride on the river on a boat for the evening, and then it's time to head out.
Generally speaking, yeah. You can go and try nice new restaurants if that's your thing. If you're a foodie, you can stay there and eat at a different place for lunch and a different place for dinner every day for a week. And you'll have great options that are all very affordable. So if you like that stuff, that's a very worthwhile thing. But if you're into
any particular ones you would recommend, or do they change too fast?
Well, everything changed a lot during COVID, so it's hard to know exactly what's going to be up to date.
Got it.
But in the general sense, now there's a few hotels that bring in world-class chefs along the river, which you're going to recognize the names. They're going to be your Marriotts and your Hiltons and things like that. That will have really nice views and very nice cuisine, but those will be more expensive, $20 or $30 for the day. But then there is an area, I'm just trying to look up the name here. It's near the river, and it's where all of the expats hang out, and it's where all of the bars and a lot of these great restaurants are.
I'm thinking you're just north of the palace.
Yeah, it's just north of the palace. It's south of the bridge. I don't know what the name of the area is,
but I know where you are. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know that it has a name. I think people just will call it Riverside because that's where everyone goes to hang out. But that whole area between, there's a highway and then there's the riverbank, and it's north of the palace and south of the bridge. It's just filled with cool places. You can just go walk around in there. It's quite walkable, especially by the riverside, and just find things that you like that look cool and give them a try.
Okay, excellent. Are we ready to move on then?
Yes, absolutely. Talking is more time than I generally spend in Phnom Penh. Yes. Mostly I went there for visa issues. It's not a place I would make a point to visit, to be perfectly honest. The main thing, of course, that everyone's going to want to see is Siem Reap. That's the big thing.
Okay. Anything you would stop at in between?
In between, I wouldn't stop on the way, but there's two different ways to get there.
Yep.
You can there's three different ways. You can take a bus. You can take a bus/boat down the Tonle Sap Lake, or you could fly. So you've got your three options. The bus ride is going to be between 10 and 12 hours. They have decent buses with seats that recline almost all the way. So that's not a terrible option. I have never done the boat ride. That's a very touristy option where you would just take a bus and then get off the bus and hop onto a boat to take you up the lake. And then, of course, you can fly and save yourself a little bit of time. It would probably only take about an hour to fly. But
I haven't done the boat ride as a form of transportation, but I have done the boat ride where you go out to the floating village on the lake. And the lake changes greatly in size from the dry season to after the monsoon season. And so as you're coming up to the lake, we were there when it was drier, and so the lake was quite far down, and so the houses are built on stilts above the lake, and it was photogenic and interesting stop to do. We did that, and then of course, very touristy, we stopped at the spider market. I don't know that I could recommend that. Go tasting the tarantula and things like that was probably not my jam, as it were.
Yeah.
It is a very touristy thing to do on the way up. We have a new sponsor for this episode of Amateur Traveler, and that's Prismatext. You want to learn a foreign language because you know it will make your travel better, but it's too hard. Prismatext gives you a different way to effortlessly learn a language. You read a story, you learn a language. When you go to prismatext.com, you can download a book and then choose how many of the words in the book are translated into the language you're trying to learn. So as you're reading, say, Agatha Christie, you get more and more Spanish words included in until you find yourself learning Spanish without even thinking about it. They have more than 400 different vocabulary words per book, and Prismatext has found that it's 50% more effective than traditional language acquisition methods. You can choose from one of 16 different languages. Want to learn French while reading biographies, or maybe German with your favorite sci-fi book? It's up to you. Instead of setting aside time to study a language, instead you can practice just by doing what you want to do, reading your favorite book. To learn more, visit prismatext.com and select from hundreds of titles to start learning a language from your favorite stories. To save 20% off your first order, you can use the code AMATEUR, AMATEUR. And thanks to Prismatext for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
That is. Okay, yeah. So that trip, when I think of that, I think of that's something you would do after you get to your hotel and settled in Siem Reap. Because it's about an hour out of town, but it's a very accessible thing to do. Like when we did it, I would like to do it in the evening. I would like to go out there.
Okay.
You go out, catch the boat out, and you have dinner. And they'll serve you some crazy like snake and weird dishes at the restaurant on the lake. And it is a very tourist trap thing. I don't think these are things that people are really eating locally that much. Though alligator's pretty popular there to eat.
Okay.
And then you'll get kids like paddling around in these tiny little, they'll paddle a bucket around it or the outside of the restaurant. They'll just have a big plastic pail and they'll paddle up to you in it to beg for money or try to sell you something. All of these little lake kids. I don't know if you saw these kids when you were there. They were there every time I went.
I don't recall seeing that as much. No.
Yeah. So literally like 8-year-olds in a giant plastic bucket with a stick would be paddling around the tourist boats coming in and out and around the floating restaurant to beg for money or to try and sell you stuff or show you a snake to take a picture or whatever it happened to be their hustle. Yeah, a lot of those kids cruising around out there these days. I think that's a very worthwhile thing, even if it does have that feeling of they're putting on a show for the tourists.
Right.
But and you're doing these neat things like trying crocodile or whatever, or a snake, and it's mostly for the tourists, but it's a really neat thing to do and to see the stilt houses on the lake, because that is really how people live.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's very worthwhile. And in the area, there's a couple cool things to do like that, where it feels a little touristy and kitschy, but it's still quite neat. There are a couple of villages around where they also do the traditional dancing, or at least pre-COVID there was, where you would go for a tourist meal and it would be a bit of a showy traditional dance thing. And you would feel like, oh, this is just a show they're putting on for us, but still it's neat to see. And it's also employing a lot of local people, which is important. In a place like Siem Reap, one thing I realized while I was there is that the countryside of Cambodia is a farming place. Siem Reap, for them, is a very large city that sprang up only because it was near Angkor Wat. Tourists were coming in, and people could come and get jobs that they couldn't get otherwise to send money back to their families in the countryside.
Right.
And so anything that's not a big foreign-owned hotel, even those are not terrible. They're employing a lot of people. But anything that's more locally owned and keeping the money in the economy there, I just feel good about going to spend money there, because that countryside around there, when you hear about $2 a day poverty in Africa and such, it's like that around that area of Cambodia as well. And a lot of those people are trying to support a family as a bellboy at a hotel. And they're sending half of that money back to their family in the countryside. So I feel very good about anything where it's locally owned, it's employing a lot of people. Don't mind spending some extra money there.
Excellent. So we're up in Siem Reap, and we're there. You said we're going for Angkor Wat. And I think that's what I thought, which is, of course, an oversimplification. Because...
Oh, my gosh. Yes. Yeah.
Because I did not realize the scale of not just a temple complex, but of all the temple complexes in the area.
Yes.
Literally square miles of temple complexes. And I don't know how many there are.
Okay, so it is crazy. Now, before we get out of Siem Reap, I just want to mention one other thing that is really great there, is there's a local circus.
Really?
And it's this fusion of acrobatics with traditional Khmer storytelling and legends. It's like their Cirque du Soleil. It's the Siem Reap Cirque du Soleil, basically.
Got it.
And it's all, again, locally owned, locally operated, employs a bunch of people to do stuff they couldn't otherwise. I believe it funds a school also. And a really good show. It's hot. It's super hot. You're going to sit there. You're going to sweat because there's no AC. But it's really good, and it's very worthwhile while you're in Siem Reap. It's just an all-around fantastic show if for other things to do while you're in town. But yeah, then the Angkor complex is massive. It spans hundreds of kilometers. So it's something that you could explore, this region of Cambodia. And if you like being outdoors like I do, you can spend almost limitless time exploring this. You can stay for a month and go to a new place every day. And so if you have a week, honestly, you might get temple fatigue of going out every day and looking at temples. But if you hit the right spots, you can go to places that are vastly different and vastly unique and just these amazing landscapes with different styles of temples, and some have waterfalls nearby and things like that, that you could have a fantastic week where every day is like something that's just mind-blowingly different than the day before. No problem.
If I asked you to pick your favorite temple complexes in the area or your favorite spots in that region,
yes,
what would your favorite be?
So I did a lot of mountain biking there. So I would cruise on my mountain bike out around the area a ton. And I have my favorite spots, and some of them I don't think I can explain in a way that will help people find them that well. Because it's go down this, you take it right through the gate, take this path. But of course, and I do encourage you, if you can deal with the heat and you're in good, decent shape, doing it by mountain bike is super fun because you can just go down random trails in the forest and you'll find just like half buried statues. You feel very Indiana Jones. You'll just be cruising past a half buried statue or a not very excavated temple that like you'll see the door to just sticking out of the ground, something like that. It's very Indiana Jones feeling, and it's hundreds of kilometers of this stuff that you can go and explore if you really want to. Now, of course, the first thing everyone is going to want to do is go see Angkor Wat at sunrise as the classic thing. Won't tell you not to because it's pretty awesome. It's pretty crowded. It's going to be busy.
Right.
But it's very nice.
Yeah, I'm the same way. It wouldn't necessarily be my favorite moment, but you got to do it.
Yeah, you got to do it. You're not going to go to Paris and not see the Eiffel Tower. Yeah. So from there, though, oh gosh, like where to even start with this stuff? Because there's so much. Now, in the main complex, there's a few other big ones to stop at. So Angkor Wat has like a moat around it. That's why you see the beautiful pictures with the reflection in the water. Directly north of there, there's a moat around the walled city. And that's where the bigger temple area is. And it's a large moat. You have to cross a bridge to go in. And if you go directly north from Angkor, you will enter the city. And in the middle is Bayon Temple, which is one that has like all of these faces on it. If you see pictures, you'll recognize it's a really pretty spectacular one as well. Again, will be pretty busy, but it's absolutely something you must see.
Probably my favorite.
Yeah, it's super cool. Photography there is so neat and challenging because you're like, how am I capturing this million face thing? I can't just stand all the way back. I want to get some close-ups. I want to get three faces in the picture. It's really fun. Yeah, super cool. Now, from there, the Bayon Temple, you're in the center of that city. Now, if you were to go directly east out of the city, it's far, like 10 kilometers. You're going to get to the West Baray. It's essentially a reservoir. It's a big rectangular shaped reservoir. Okay. It has a temple on an island in it that you can get a boat out to. This is a newer thing that was built for visiting. It's not a old temple, but it's a really cool place to go. And on the southern coast, the southern shore of that is a bunch of like local restaurants. Local people will go out to that beret to spend the day. You get a place, you rent a hammock in a place that sells food. You drink food, eat food, drink beer, and go swimming. And everybody goes swimming. And it's a really nice place to spend a day or an afternoon if you just want to chill out on the shore of the Bray. And it's super nice. Really, we used to love doing that in the afternoons. Just a bunch of people. We all get hammocks. You get a hammock in the shade. Order beers. They're like 50 cents each. And go for a swim. Go for a swim in the water. Now, if you go back to Bayon Temple, which we're using as a center point.
Okay, got it.
Because it's in the middle of all of the things that are near the city.
Right.
In this main area that people visit, it's at the center. Now, if you go directly north from Bayon Temple, you'll leave the city.
Yep.
And then you would take a turn right and go east. And there is another beret here. It's also another big reservoir that has an island in the middle and a temple. Okay, it's called Nikpoan. This place blew me away. I didn't see it until I moved there. On my first couple trips, I'd never run into this spot. And I can share with you a picture that maybe you can put on the podcast later, because it's the most creepy and photogenic scene from a horror movie. When you get to this, see, there's a bridge that goes from the north shore directly down into that island, which has this cool, overgrown, like Indiana Jones, Tomb Raider feeling temple. And it has these sculpted pools, clearly built square pools in the middle of the island and stuff. It's just really cool area. But when you walk along this bridge that goes out to the island, on both sides of you, sticking up out of the water, are dead trees that are all turned white now. So it's dead feeling area. It's just this mirror glassy water and just dead trees as far as the eye can see sticking out, just bare tree trunks that have all turned white with time. And it has this very haunted, weird, crazy haunted feeling. It's a really neat, it's hard to explain the atmosphere and the feeling there. And then you go to that island with its overgrown temple ruins and square pools that have been built so long ago. It's a really, really neat, different thing. That really blew me away when I saw it for the first time. It felt like you're really exploring.
Put it in context for people. This particular one, for instance, I'm looking up is from the second half of the 12th century. So all of these places are quite old in terms of how long they've been there. And so some of them, that's why some of them are still not uncovered. Some of them have been reclaimed by the jungle and will never be uncovered in our lifetime.
So much is not uncovered that it's insane. You can go down. There's always trails off into the jungle. And I really liked just taking my mountain bike down those trails. And you'll find things where you're like, I don't even know if anyone has seen this before. It feels like you're the first person to find it, like some half-buried statue of a lion or something that you're just like, wow. It feels like I'm just finding this like an archaeologist. There's so much of that because it's such a massive complex. And this is why I say you can go out there, you can just spend forever exploring without finding everything or seeing everything. And it's very enchanting to be able to do that.
And you mentioned the Tomb Raider temple. And so that is another very popular one. You're going to have crowds that's the
Top Prom temple. Yeah.
So
I was about to say we can't forget to mention the Tomb Raider temple, of course.
One of the things I like that they did at that temple, and I would recommend going to it, it is popular for a reason, is that they left it half covered in the vines. They could have...
It's got that giant tree growing over one of the entrances where the roots are coming down both sides. Yeah. It's super cool.
A lot of the other temples were like that at one point, and they cleared them, which is interesting also because then you get to see more of how they were intended to be. But this one is a little more of how it was.
Now, so from Bayon Temple, Taprom is, from that, going back to the central Bayon Temple, you would go east out of the city, cross the bridge out of the city.
Right.
You have to cross a second little river, and then turn and go south a little bit to Taprom. That's how you get there. And it's not as busy as you would expect it to be for being the Tomb Raider temple. I've rarely ran into many other people around there.
Oh, really?
And I didn't know. And maybe I just lucked out. Like, that's totally possible. And there's another little temple that I don't even see it on Google Maps. That's just up the road from Taprom. It's like you'd have to just stop. You'd see it on the side of the road and have to just stop because it's not very big. Nobody stops there. But it's another one that has a tree growing directly out of the top with roots coming down everywhere that nobody ever goes to, though, because it's smaller.
Sure.
But it was always one of my favorite places to go take pictures because it had all the roots and the vines and a really neat feel to it. Gosh, and then where to go from there? Those are the main sites that people like to see.
Right.
In this area. Now, the one that I've never heard anyone else talk about is that Nikpoan one. And the one that's in the middle of the beret, in the middle of that reservoir with all the dead trees. And along the north shore, the road goes along the north shore of that reservoir. There's several little side detours to other little temple complexes that I liked. And this whole area doesn't seem to get a ton of traffic, from what I could tell. So it's a nice place to go explore and see some things that other people aren't seeing. And this is an area that has a lot of those cool little side trails where you could go and find some temples that nobody else is going to. But then from there, at least from what I know, I haven't explored the complex to the degree where I could say that I know everything in it or where you should go. But those are the places that I know very well. So there are other places people like. There's East Barai and Sarashrang, which are also in the eastern part of this, but I am not as familiar with those.
Okay.
But I do know people really like them. Now, if we start going a little further afield, because you can drive for hours and still find temple complexes in this area. There's so many. So now, if we are traveling further afield, north from Siem Reap, once we get out of town, say about an hour and a half drive, you start getting close to some national parks. There's the Kulin National Park. And along this highway, there's a couple of spots that are very popular once you're going exploring further afield. The first one's called Bantier Shre. It's another just beautiful complex of temples that I think is from a bit of a different era than a lot of the ones you've seen before. I think this is a 10th century one. Yes, it's an older one. It's a very well-maintained one that has a really nice visitor center. Again, it's got the square moat around it, which is a very traditional Khmer style of architecture.
Right.
And it's a very, very visually beautiful and striking temple. It's a really nice one, and it's well worth the drive out there.
And I noticed when we started talking about this as we were getting ready to record this, my first reaction was, oh, I didn't get to this. And then I took one of my photos that I didn't know where it was and looked it up on Google Image Search, and that's where it was.
Oh, yeah. This is one that you're going to still get recommended as a second or a third day in town thing.
Exactly.
They'll be like, you've seen the main complex, you should check out Bantier Shre. And it is worth it. This temple, you're going to walk around it for an hour and a half, though, and then you're going to be like, time to go. But we've already driven an hour or an hour and a half to get out here. So I would do this area as a 1 day trip or a 2 day trip to go and explore this sort of north of town area, because there's a ton to see, but it's an uncomfortable enough drive that you don't want to repeat it over and over.
I had fun on this episode of Amateur Traveler because I got to use my photos in the illustrated version of this show with all of my photos from Cambodia. And the thought that I might not be able to find the right photos or that I might lose the photos is really just unthinkable. It's the one thing I bring home from my trip. I don't collect spoons, I collect photos. But what to do with all those photos can be a bit of a challenge. And then if you combine that my wife is also taking pictures and maybe we've got pictures from my kids as well, then I need a solution like Mylio Photos, who are sponsoring this episode. Mylio Photos is a smart system for managing a lifetime of photos from multiple devices and multiple people. My old photo albums are near the door so that I could grab them in an emergency. Don't my digital photos deserve the same kind of attention? Mylio Photos lets me find, search, remove duplicates, but also remove some of the worry of losing those photos. If you want to try Mylio Photos, because you're a listener of Amateur Traveler, you can get 25% off your first year of Mylio Photos when you sign up for an annual plan by going to mylio.com/traveler. That's mylio.com/traveler. Get 25% off your first year at mylio.com/traveler. And thanks to Mylio for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
So from Banjie Shrey, if you continue north along this same main highway, you're going to very shortly, it's not very far, there's a place called Cabal Speen, or the Valley of 1,000 Linguas. This is an area that has a river with carvings that are in the river in sandstone that are, I'm not sure how old they are. It's very unique. It's very different from everything else that you've seen so far. So it's more like seeing, a lot of them are phallic, these sculptures that are carved under the water. And then a lot of it just looks like an old text. So it's a hike, you hike along this river and you just see all of these different places where somebody has carved under the river all of these symbols and text. And it's a very unique and different just part of that history. Now these, I think, these are from the 11th century. How sandstone keeps sculptures under running water for that long, I'm not sure how that actually worked. But they've been there for almost 1,000 years. And so it's very worthwhile. There's also a really cool temple on top of a hill there. It's not an old one. It's a new one that people actually go to worship with a giant bell inside. It's a very neat spot too, to stop there. And then from there, if you're going to continue, because again, this is a stop for an hour or 2 hours, but it's not going to be your whole day. The hike will take you an hour. So you can continue from there. You can backtrack a little bit and then travel east to the Kulen waterfall. You could spend a full day out here very easily to just explore. This is just a natural mountain area. This is in the Kulen National Park, which is named for the Kulen Mountain. So mountains in Cambodia aren't big mountains, but it is a mountain where you get the vista. You get to see all of the surrounding landscaping. You can see for like 100 miles because there's no other mountains in the way. Everything is flat there. And then there's a really beautiful waterfall you can hike to, and there are various different vistas where you can go to look over different directions and see the temples in the distance. And there's not a lot of other places where you get this kind of view in the area. There's just not many mountains around. So it's very nice to be able to get that different perspective on this plains area. Okay. And so in doing those three things, now you've definitely probably filled up your whole day. You're probably done for the day and exhausted and either ready to drive back or get a room for the night and go off to explore even more in this northern area. Because now, even if you just look on Google Maps, you're going to see temples or wats all over the place still that you can go to check out. There's a wildlife sanctuary that's near there as well, which is really cool. Yeah, there's just tons more to see if you want to spend 2 or 3 days out in this northern area. But those would be...
What sort of wildlife would I find that is in that area?
Oh, gosh, that's a good question. I don't recall monkeys or anything. It's just jungle wildlife.
Okay.
But nothing that jumps to mind as I can describe that people will latch on to.
One of the last places on the earth where you can find a giant ibis, apparently.
Really?
The national bird of Cambodia.
Huh. I had no idea. I know you can find those giant hornets all over the place. Those crazy giant Asian murder hornets.
Oh, great.
They got those. Oh boy, do they have those.
Excellent. What else do we want
Yeah.
to see in this area, or where else would you send us while we're in Cambodia?
From here, I think these are most of my recommendations, which would probably take up.
Okay.
If you just did only Phnom Penh and Siem Reap, didn't even go to the south, I feel like just out of these things, I would spend a week to 10 days doing what I just described.
Okay.
Very, very easily, right? Now, if you are adding in a quick jaunt down south to, say, Kampot, which is, again, a really popular spot to go visit, you've just taken up 3 days of your trip minimum, because it'll take a day of driving to get to Kampot. And then you would spend at least a day in Kampot. And then you would take a day to get back to Phnom Penh before you moved on to Siem Reap. This is the challenge of Cambodia, right? Everything is a one-way trip out of Phnom Penh, and then you have to come back, and it's far.
And we'd be going to Kampot for the beach, or why? What would we go down there to do?
Yeah, Kampot is a beach and a river. It's a place where people, I think, mostly hang out by the river, but also there's some beach areas nearby. It's just a very nice natural area that people like to go to. But the difficulty in Cambodia is managing your time by these round trips to go places and come back from them, because for Kampot, the only way to get there is to drive. And it's a long drive. So you're going to spend most of your day on the road. Now, with at least you've got a little bit few options to get from Phnom Penh to Siem Reap, but no matter how you do it, you're still going to spend about a day traveling. Even if you fly, you're showing up before your flight, taking the flight, getting off, getting into town, and getting to your hotel, and you're going to have a day spent moving. I think that my preference would be a couple days in Phnom Penh. And if I'm stretched for time and I don't have a lot of it, I'm not going to try and squeeze in a trip to the south, because I feel like you're not getting your highlights there and you're not going to make the most of your time. I would spend the vast majority of my trip around Siem Reap and spend 2 to 3 days checking out Siem Reap. Look, the town of Siem Reap is also really cool, with great food and great restaurants and a very vibrant local art scene itself. It's a very nice place to spend your evenings. And then during the day, I would spend at least 2-3 days doing the main Angkor complex. And then I would save some time to get further afield, get way out there into the countryside, drive for a couple of days to these places that are further afield. That's where you're going to feel like you're really seeing also Cambodia. You're going to be away from, as much as Siem Reap is still real Cambodia, you're going to get to see how 90% of the people live. They're real villages. You're just going to drive through them. It's perfectly safe. There's nothing sketchy about going out into these areas. It's 100% safe. And you're going to see just areas that are so mind-blowingly different than home, or anywhere that's more tourist friendly. Right. You'll be able to book online, but you'll start staying in guest houses that are just some big old Cambodian house, because that's all that's out there. And you'll go to these temple complexes, and you can find them very easily on Google Maps, that are just, you feel like you're the only person to ever go visit them. And I'd spend a couple days trying to do that, because I feel like that gives you the really exciting feel of, I really explored this place. And you've got the national park up there too, with the waterfalls in it. That's really beautiful. I think that's all very worthwhile.
You talked about getting out on the countryside. The last episode we did years back on Cambodia was when I took a group of listeners to Phnom Penh, Siem Reap, and we also went to Battambang and rode the bamboo train, which is
what
people do in Battambang. That's all that's there. And great video for that on the website if you're interested. But we went in overland. We went from Ho Chi Minh City to Phnom Penh, and then we exited from Battambang to Bangkok. And it's fascinating that you'll obviously have to stop at the borders, present your passports and those things. You won't have any questions where you cross the border. But even if they took those out, you could tell when you had left one country and entered another country. You know, when you went from Vietnam to Cambodia, there was more trash. I would say that was the bad news. There was also the rural farms. We saw more motorized buffalo. What do you call it?
The motorized buffalo.
Yeah.
I know the buffalo. Like they have buffalo in everyone's backyard and just wandering around in the countryside of Cambodia.
These were
but
the
I don't know.
two-wheel tractors.
Oh.
When it was motorized, and so it was starting to be automated, but you'd use it for everything out there. If you didn't have the water buffalo.
Yes. Yeah, okay.
It's the only place I've seen
those are
something
everywhere.
like it. But it's a hand-pushed tractor. But it does have two wheels and an engine and a two-stroke engine or something like that. And then you'd go into Thailand, and suddenly it would be highways and trucks. Just very different and much more developed. So fascinating going overland and just even with those three countries, seeing the difference between the different countries.
Huge difference. Like you go from paved 4-lane highways and coming up to the border of Thailand, and then you're on it's a decent highway coming into Cambodia, but half of everything once you get off of the main highway across the country, they're either incredibly potholed, uneven roads or just dirt roads. If you like to dirt bike, it's the most appropriate form of transportation there. Rent a dirt bike and go have a blast and cruise around. But the roads are so bad that a normal car, even in the city, you don't want a normal car.
They're so bad, but every kilometer they tell you that government brought you this road. There was literally a sign like every kilometer, and I'm thinking, I don't know if I'd brag about this. If I were you.
And this is why I want to stress that you want to minimize your driving time on a trip to maximize your comfort. And it's not just because you're spending time in a car. It's you're spending time in a car on a road that's probably not the best road. And you're not going to want to it's not driving from LA to San Francisco. It's very different than cruising down a freeway. You are on a bumpy road with usually unpredictable traffic and a lot of swerving going on. So you're going to want to minimize that as much as possible and make the most use you can after you traveled a distance to an area.
Anything else you want to tell people before we wrap this up with our wrap-up questions?
Yeah, go stay at the Happy Elephant in Siem Reap. It's a fantastic little boutique hotel that is owned by this really sweet lady who has spent all of COVID losing money trying to keep it open to pay her employees. She's a one-woman NGO trying to support the local economy there. Highly recommend the Happy Elephant little boutique hotel there in Siem Reap. But that's about it. Other than that, no, it's a nice place. Definitely go visit and support everything local that you can. And don't worry about whether you're getting overcharged or not, because even if you are, it's still going to be incredibly cheap. And honestly, this is a place that deserves it. And a lot of people that you're supporting, and you are supporting local families who are supporting their parents out in the countryside who have no option to go get a job. So I would just recommend be free with your money, and you can feel good that it's going to be usually generally going to the right place to help somebody.
Excellent. As we get to our wrap-up questions, Matt, you are standing in the prettiest spot in Cambodia. Where are you standing, and what are you looking at?
Ooh. Oh, wow. There's a few spots that strike me for that. One is that temple that I mentioned that's at the north of the complex. That one blows me away visually. I'll send you a picture later. But Bante, the Barai that is west of the complex that I mentioned, it's north of the airport. You'll see it on a map. It's a giant rectangle of water, West Barai. I spent a lot of sunsets there in a hammock. So pretty. The little island on the lake. There's a little island on the lake with a little temple on it that's just quaint. And it's such a pleasant atmosphere. It's probably one of my favorite spots that I remember fondly. And just watching the sun go down there. Really pretty.
Excellent. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Cambodia.
Oh, okay. I was mountain biking a lot and running a lot. So we were living at a hotel that was about halfway between Siem Reap and the temple complex. It's the last hotel before you get to the temple complex. So our backyard is farmland. It's just whatever farmland when I go out back to go ride my bike or go for a jog. And I discovered temples in people's little yards. I would go different routes and find just random temples from whatever, the 12th century, just sitting there. And there'd be like a little barely worn path up to them because they're tiny. They're the size of a shed or something. And just having that all the time, regularly, just being out in exploring around somewhere random, a 10th century temple sitting there that nobody's taking care of. It's just sitting there. That's just there. And it would happen often, which is why I love exploring there so much. You feel like Indiana Jones constantly.
It's funny. I mentioned that on our trip we ended in Bangkok, and we had an extra day, and we were trying to decide what to do, and we were looking at the different tours we could do, and one of them was up to some of the famous historic temples north and west of Bangkok. And we kind of looked at the brochure and went, oh, it's kind of like Angkor Wat, but smaller. I just feel since having been to Angkor Wat, everything is, kind of like Angkor Wat, but smaller.
Yeah.
It is for other things.
What's going to change it? Yeah, like even after I lived in Guatemala and went to all of the Mayan temples there and stuff, and this difference in scale. If you've been to the temples in Mexico or in Guatemala and stuff, they are impressive, and the scale of Angkor Wat just dwarfs them. It's humbling, and it'll spoil you for everything except the pyramids or something like that, because the scale and the intricacy are just.
Teotihuacan would be the one exception for me in Mexico, because the size of the pyramid, but half the height or whatever. But yeah, everything else is small.
It is, and it is a bucket list thing. If you have come to Asia, it's one of the things I will always say. You got to go see it. You're never going to get a chance to see something like this again, probably.
And I'm going to say you should always get the mango smoothie when offered. What's one thing you would always order in Cambodia?
You are correct, but that's all over Asia. Get the mango smoothie every time. If you're a meat eater, the beef lak lak is a local dish that is absolutely just this wonderful comfort food. It's beef served in a peppery gravy over rice. It's Cambodian comfort food. It's absolutely fantastic. And you should, if you don't get that, you can get other lak laks, but beef is the most common. It's like the Cambodian version of a hamburger. You can get it everywhere. It's delicious everywhere. Everyone knows how to make it, and it's really good.
Excellent. And if you had to summarize Cambodia in just 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Oh, gosh. Dusty. Didn't mention that. It is dry and dusty, and those dirt roads, kick up the dust. It's dusty.
Except when it's wet and muddy.
It's dusty, it's hot, and it's happy.
Excellent. Our guest again has been Matt Gibson from expatmatt.com. Matt, how old is expatmatt.com?
2008 was the first edition that I put it up. Yeah, long time ago.
And if we wanted to send people to your best post on Cambodia, where are we going to send them? My first ever photo tour in Angkor Wat?
This one is good. There's also one called, I might have hidden it, called Life and Death in Angkor Wat. It's a personal story, though. They're both good. One's about a tour. One's about a personal spiritual experience in Angkor Wat.
I'll put a link to both of those in the show notes. Matt, thanks so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your obvious love for Cambodia.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks as always to the patrons of Amateur Traveler who help support the show financially. If you're interested in becoming a patron of the show because you've loved the show so much or gotten so much from it, go to patreon.com/amateurtraveler to learn more. I enjoyed putting together this episode. I got a chance to use a lot of my photography from Cambodia and relive some of the trip that I did with some of you who are listening to the show now. And you might find pictures of you in the pictures in this episode if you were there with me in Cambodia. And I also linked in the show notes places to visit in Cambodia article, which is about that particular trip. And it has some of the videos that I mentioned of the Battambang bamboo train and things like that. So check that out. We're still looking for more people to go to Japan. The go, no-go decision for that is going to be sometime in June. So if you're interested, sign up. Have to sign up by that time. If we don't get more people, we won't have enough to go. For more information, go to amateurtraveler.com/trips for that. And then there should be more information soon about that second trip to Morocco for the Amateur Traveler trip in 2024. And with that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have a question, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.
Got to see one more.